Kate Morrison had been fixing engines in Pine Ridge, Colorado for 8 years, and the townspeople thought grease under her fingernails was the most dangerous thing about her. They had no idea she could turn a wrench into a detonator, or that the steady hands changing their oil had once diffused bombs that could level city blocks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pine Ridge sat nestled in a valley between snow-capped peaks, population 2847, where the biggest excitement usually came from the annual Harvest Festival or the occasional bear wandering through Main Street. The town existed because of the old copper mine that had closed decades ago, leaving behind a community of hardy souls who preferred mountain isolation to city chaos. It was exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear without ever really hiding. Morrison's Auto and Scrap occupied a sprawling lot on the outskirts of town, bordered by ponderosa pines and marked by a hand-painted sign that had seen better decades. The main garage could handle 6 vehicles at once, though Kate rarely worked on more than 3. She preferred taking her time, doing things right, charging fair prices that kept the locals coming back. The attached scrapyard stretched behind the building like a metallic graveyard filled with rusted pickup trucks, abandoned farm equipment, and the skeletal remains of vehicles that had lost battles with mountain roads. Kate herself was 34, compact and strong, with calloused hands and dark hair she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the same uniform every day, steel-toed boots, worn jeans, and a navy blue work shirt with Morrison's embroidered over the pocket. A thin scar ran from her left temple to her jawline, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. When people asked about it, she'd shrug and mention something about a wrench slipping during her apprenticeship in Denver. The townspeople had their theories about Kate Morrison, of course. Small towns always did. Some figured she'd inherited the garage from a relative, though no one remembered any Morrisons living in Pine Ridge before she arrived. Others suspected a bad divorce or family tragedy had driven her to seek solitude in the mountains. Deputy Sheriff Tom Bradley, who brought his patrol cruiser in for regular maintenance, sometimes wondered about the way Kate could diagnose mechanical problems by sound alone, or how she seemed to know exactly which part would fail before it actually did. What none of them knew was what lay beneath the false floor in the garage's back corner, accessible through a hydraulic lift system Kate had installed herself. The hidden workshop below ground level would have made a military bomb disposal unit envious. Workbenches lined with precision tools that had never touched an engine, chemical analysis equipment capable of identifying explosive compounds, blast suits hanging like discarded armor, and in a climate-controlled cabinet devices that looked innocent enough until you understood their purpose. Remote detonators, timing mechanisms, and components for explosives that officially didn't exist. Every morning before opening the garage, Kate descended into this hidden space for what she called maintenance rounds. She tested equipment, reviewed technical manuals printed in languages most civilians couldn't read, and practiced procedures with the muscle memory of someone who had once had 60 seconds to choose between the red wire and the blue one while under enemy fire. A basement workshop was where Sergeant First Class Catherine M. Wrench Morrison, former Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist, kept the skills sharp that Kate Morrison, small-town mechanic, pretended never to have learned.
The transformation hadn't been easy. For the first 2 years in Pine Ridge, Kate jumped every time a car backfired or a pneumatic tool hissed to life. She'd installed motion sensors around the property perimeter and kept go bags hidden in 3 different locations. Sleep came in 3-hour increments, interrupted by dreams of desert sand and the sound of incoming mortars. But gradually, the mountains had worked their quiet magic. The rhythm of honest work, the satisfaction of fixing things that stayed fixed, the simple pleasure of being helpful rather than lethal, it had slowly rebuilt something inside her that she'd thought was permanently broken. The morning routine was sacred now. Kate arrived at the garage before dawn, unlocked the rolling doors, and started the coffee maker in the tiny office. She'd review the day's appointments in a leather-bound scheduler that never left the premises, then walk the perimeter of the property, ostensibly checking for overnight damage, but actually scanning for anything that didn't belong. Only then would she flip the open sign and settle into the comfortable fiction of being nothing more than a capable mechanic who kept reasonable hours and charged honest prices. On weekends, when the garage was closed, Kate often hiked the mountain trails above town, carrying a backpack that casual observers would assume contained water and trail mix. They'd be wrong about the trail mix. The pack held equipment for what she called field exercises, practice sessions in terrains similar to where she'd once served, keeping reflexes sharp and skills current. She told herself it was just habit, the way some people couldn't stop checking locked doors or balancing checkbooks. The truth was more complicated. Catherine Morrison had learned to live with peace, but she'd never learned to trust it. The closest anyone in Pine Ridge had come to discovering her secret was during a 4th of July celebration 3 years earlier. The town's volunteer fire department had been setting up fireworks when something went wrong with the timing mechanism. A professional-grade mortar shell had failed to launch, sitting armed and ready to explode in the launching tube. The fire chief was preparing to evacuate a 2-block radius when Kate quietly appeared with a toolkit and 30 years of experience handling things designed to kill people. She approached the device with the same calm concentration she brought to rebuilding transmissions, making adjustments that looked simple but required knowledge most civilians would take years to acquire. When the shell launched successfully moments later, painting the night sky with patriotic colors, the grateful fire chief bought her drinks for a month. Kate accepted the gratitude gracefully while mentally cataloging how many people had been standing within the blast radius and what the casualty count would have been if she had chosen to remain just a mechanic that night. That incident had been the closest call yet, but Kate knew it wouldn't be the last. The skills that made her valuable to the Army didn't simply disappear because she'd changed zip codes and occupations. They remained, humming quietly beneath the surface of her new life, like a secondary engine that never quite shut down. And sometimes, late at night when mountain wind rattled the garage doors, Kate Morrison wondered if the peace she'd found in Pine Ridge was real or just the calm before a storm she hadn't seen coming yet. The question would be answered sooner than she expected.
The nightmares always started the same way. Desert heat pressing against her face like a furnace, the weight of the bomb suit making every movement deliberate and calculated. In the dream, Kate was always 26 again, Sergeant First Class Morrison, walking toward a device that shouldn't exist, carrying tools that might not work, with 60 seconds on the timer and 6 lives depending on her steady hands. She'd wake at 3:17 a.m., the same time every night, drenched in sweat despite Colorado's mountain chill. The scar along her jawline would throb like phantom pain from an old wound, and for a moment, the garage apartment above Morrison's auto and scrap would feel like a forward operating base in Kandahar province. Then, reality would settle back in. The scent of pine trees instead of cordite, the sound of wind through mountain peaks instead of distant gunfire. These early morning hours belonged to Catherine Morrison, not Kate. She'd pull on cargo pants and a black t-shirt, descendants of uniforms she'd once worn with pride, and descend into the hidden workshop beneath the garage floor. The transition was like stepping through time, from civilian life back into a world where split-second decisions meant the difference between going home and going home in pieces. The workshop was a shrine to controlled destruction. Every tool had its place, every component cataloged and maintained according to protocols she'd memorized during 3 tours in Afghanistan. The workbenches held devices that would make most people nervous just looking at them: remote detonators, pressure sensors, chemical analysis equipment capable of identifying explosive compounds from trace residue. In a locked cabinet along the far wall, Kate maintained what she called her insurance policy: components for charges that could level buildings or precision devices capable of disabling a single circuit board without damaging anything else in the room. She'd built this sanctuary during her first winter in Pine Ridge, when the isolation and endless snowfall had nearly driven her back to active duty. Working with her hands, creating something functional and purposeful, had been the therapy no VA counselor could provide. Every night, she descended into the basement to install another piece of equipment, wire another system, build another layer of the life she was trying to construct above ground.
The equipment told the story of Sergeant First Class Catherine Morrison's military career better than any service record. The blast suit hanging in the corner had protected her through 47 bomb disposal operations, its Kevlar panels scarred by shrapnel that had tried to kill her in 17 different countries. The chemical analysis station had been built from components she liberated during her final deployment, officially listed as damaged beyond repair, but actually shipped to a dead drop address in Denver before finding its way to Pine Ridge. Most telling was the photo taped to the inside of her equipment locker. 6 soldiers in desert camouflage standing beside an armored vehicle, their faces showing the particular exhaustion that came from defusing devices designed by people who understood exactly how bomb disposal protocols worked. Kate was second from the left, 28 years old, and still believing that skill and training could overcome any threat. The other 5 faces in the photo were now carved into black granite at Arlington National Cemetery. Her team had been the best the Army had ever fielded. Sergeant First Class Tommy Liu, the electronics specialist who could trace wiring through concrete walls by instinct alone. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the chemical expert who could identify explosive compounds by smell. Corporal David Chen, barely 22 but capable of building or dismantling devices that existed only in theoretical manuals. Specialist Emma Rodriguez, the robotics operator who could thread a mechanical hand through spaces human fingers couldn't reach. And Captain Frank Delacroix, their commanding officer who'd led them through missions that officially never happened, in places that weren't supposed to exist. They called themselves the wrench turners, a nickname that started as a joke about Kate's mechanical aptitude, but evolved into something deeper. They were the people you called when conventional explosive ordnance disposal teams encountered something beyond their training. Improvised devices built by former military engineers. Chemical weapons disguised as conventional explosives. Nuclear materials incorporated into dirty bombs. The kind of threats that required operators willing to work without backup, without support, and sometimes without hope of survival.
Kate's specialization had been improvised explosive devices with anti-handling mechanisms, bombs designed to kill the people trying to disarm them. She developed techniques for approaching these devices that combined mechanical engineering, behavioral psychology, and what her instructors had called controlled recklessness. Her methods were unorthodox, sometimes dangerous, but they worked. In 4 years of operations, she'd never lost a device, never failed to render safe a threat she'd been asked to handle. The end had come during what should have been a routine operation in Helmand Province. Intelligence indicated a cache of conventional explosives hidden in an abandoned compound. The mission briefing mentioned possible booby traps, but nothing beyond standard precautions. Kate's team had approached the site with their usual professional confidence, following protocols they'd executed dozens of times before. The first device had been exactly what intelligence predicted, a simple pressure plate trigger connected to military-grade explosives. Kate disabled it in under 3 minutes, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed the same procedure in her sleep. The second device was more sophisticated, incorporating electronic components that suggested foreign training, but still within their operational parameters. The third device had been waiting for them. It was built by someone who understood not just explosive ordnance disposal procedures, but the specific techniques Kate's team used. The device incorporated elements designed to defeat every countermeasure in their tactical manual. Worse, it was connected to a secondary charge hidden 50 meters away, positioned to kill anyone who successfully disarmed the primary device. Kate had recognized the signature immediately. The particular way components were wired, the redundant trigger mechanisms, the almost artistic precision of the construction. She'd seen this work before, during training exercises at Fort Belvoir, when instructors built devices specifically designed to challenge advanced EOD techniques. Someone had taken those theoretical exercises and turned them into operational weapons. The realization had hit her like a physical impact. They were being hunted by someone who knew exactly how they worked, someone with access to classified training materials and detailed knowledge of their capabilities. The mission wasn't routine intelligence gathering, it was a trap, specifically designed for her team.
Kate had tried to abort the operation, but by then it was too late. The compound was surrounded by devices she couldn't see, couldn't detect, couldn't safely approach. Her team was trapped in a maze of explosives built by someone who'd studied their methods, anticipated their responses, prepared for every technique they might use. The explosion, when it came, wasn't from any device Kate had been working on. It was a command-detonated charge, triggered remotely by someone watching from a safe distance. Someone who'd waited until her entire team was in the kill zone before sending the signal that ended 5 lives and left Kate buried under rubble with shrapnel in her face and the sound of her teammates' voices calling for help that would never come. She'd spent 6 months in military hospitals, undergoing surgeries to repair damage that went deeper than physical wounds. The Army offered commendations, promotions, assignments to training facilities where she could pass on her expertise to the next generation of bomb disposal specialists. Kate had declined everything, requested discharge, and disappeared into civilian life with a new identity and enough classified knowledge to make several foreign intelligence services very interested in having lengthy conversations with her. Pine Ridge had been chosen specifically for its isolation, its distance from anything that might remind her of sand and heat, and the particular silence that followed successful explosions. For 8 years, she'd maintained the fiction that Catherine Morrison had died in Afghanistan along with the rest of her team. But late at night, in the workshop beneath Morrison's auto and scrap, she kept the skills sharp and the equipment ready, because some lessons were too hard learned to forget. The past, Kate had discovered, was like an unexploded device, seemingly inert until someone applied the right kind of pressure. And pressure, she was about to learn, was heading toward Pine Ridge in the form of 3 black SUVs carrying people who knew exactly who she really was.
The sound reached Kate before the vehicles came into view, the distinctive hum of military-grade engines designed for reliability over comfort, coupled with the slight whistle of reinforced tires that would handle anything from highway speeds to off-road pursuit. She was replacing brake pads on Mrs. Henderson's ancient Ford pickup when the noise made her freeze, wrench halfway to her toolbox, every nerve suddenly alive with recognition. 3 black Chevy Suburbans rolled down Pine Ridge's main street with the deliberate precision of a tactical convoy. No license plates visible from her angle, windows tinted beyond legal civilian standards, and moving at exactly 35 miles per hour, fast enough to maintain momentum, slow enough to assess threats. Kate had seen enough military convoys to recognize the formation. Lead vehicle for reconnaissance, command vehicle in the center, trail vehicle watching for pursuit or ambush. She set down the wrench with practiced calm and walked to the garage's front window, positioning herself where she could observe without being obviously visible. The convoy turned onto the gravel road leading to Morrison's auto and scrap, stones crunching under heavy tires in a rhythm that reminded her uncomfortably of incoming artillery rounds. The vehicle stopped in a perfect defensive formation, lead and trail units positioned to provide crossfire coverage, while the center vehicle's occupants dismounted. 6 men emerged with the fluid coordination of a special operations team. They wore civilian clothes, but Kate could read their military background in every movement. The way they automatically established fields of fire, the unconscious adjustment of clothing that suggested concealed weapons, and the particular alertness that marked operators who'd survived situations where split-second awareness meant the difference between mission success and body bags. The team leader was obvious immediately. Mid-30s, compact build, moving with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command in hostile environments. He approached the garage alone while his men maintained overwatch positions, their casual postures fooling no one who understood tactical deployment. Kate had recognized the approach pattern from her own training: demonstrate overwhelming capability while maintaining the fiction of peaceful contact. Morrison's auto and scrap? The team leader's voice carried through the open garage door with the crisp diction of someone who'd spent years issuing orders that needed to be understood the first time. Looking for the owner. Kate emerged from behind the Ford, wiping her hands on a shop rag with deliberate casualness. That'd be me, Kate Morrison. What can I do for you? The man studied her face with the intensity of someone comparing it to a photograph burned into memory. When his gaze lingered on the scar along her jawline, Kate knew the peaceful phase of this conversation was already over.
Captain Frank Delacroix, United States Army Special Forces. He didn't offer identification, didn't need to. Kate had recognized him the moment he'd stepped out of the vehicle, 4 years older than when she'd last seen him, bearing new scars and the particular weariness that came from too many missions in too many places that didn't officially exist, but unmistakably the commanding officer who'd led her team through operations that had redefined the meaning of impossible. Frank. Kate's voice remained steady despite the flood of memories threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed defenses. Been a while. 8 years, 2 months, 16 days. Delacroix's response carried the precision of someone who'd been counting. Since Helmand Province. Since we lost the team. Kate felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied thoughts of that final mission. We lost everyone, Frank, including me. Catherine Morrison died in that compound along with the rest of them. Did she? Delacroix moved closer, his voice dropping to conversational level while maintaining eye contact that could have cut steel. Because Sergeant First Class Catherine Morrison was the finest explosive ordnance disposal specialist the Army ever produced. Kate Morrison fixes pickup trucks in Colorado. Seems like a waste of talent. Some talents are better left buried. Kate gestured towards the scrapyard behind the garage, where rusted vehicles sat like monuments to mechanical failure. I fix things that are broken and don't ask questions about how they got that way. Simple life. Peaceful life. Delacroix's expression hardened slightly. Peace is a luxury some people can't afford. Right now, there are operators in the field who need the kind of skills Catherine Morrison possessed. Kate Morrison's skills won't save them.
Kate turned back toward the Ford, resuming work on the brake pads with movements that were perhaps a little too controlled, a little too precise. Then send someone else. Army's got plenty of EOD specialists. Not like you. Delacroix followed her into the garage, his team maintaining their positions, but clearly ready to respond if the situation deteriorated. We've got a situation developing in Syria. Joint operation with Kurdish forces, targeting a weapons cache that's been supplying improvised explosive devices to insurgent groups. Intelligence indicates the cache is protected by devices that incorporate advanced anti-handling mechanisms. Kate's hands never paused in their work, but Delacroix noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. He'd always been able to read her tells. Anti-handling mechanisms aren't new, Frank. Any competent EOD team can deal with basic booby traps. These aren't basic. Delacroix pulled out a tablet, swiping to photographs that made Kate's blood run cold. The images showed devices of extraordinary sophistication, multi-stage triggers, redundant fail-safes, component arrangements that demonstrated intimate knowledge of American EOD procedures. Someone's building these specifically to kill our disposal specialists. 3 teams have approached the cache. None of them made it out. Kate finally stopped working, setting down her tools with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain control. The devices in the photographs bore the same signature she'd encountered in Afghanistan. The particular attention to detail, the artistic precision of the construction, the incorporation of elements designed to defeat every countermeasure in the tactical manual. Who's building them? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Someone with access to classified training materials. Someone who understands our procedures better than we do. Delacroix's voice carried the weight of personal loss. Catherine, 3 of the operators who died trying to approach that cache were kids I trained. Good kids. They followed protocol, did everything by the book, and it got them killed because someone's written a better book. Kate moved to the garage's rear window, staring out at the pine-covered mountains that had sheltered her for 8 years. The peaceful isolation she'd built around herself suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting for the wind to change direction. Why me, Frank? You know what happened in Afghanistan. You know why I left. Because you're the only person who's ever successfully dealt with devices built by whoever is doing this. Because you developed techniques that aren't in any manual, approaches that can't be anticipated or countered. Delacroix joined her at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. And because the intelligence we've gathered suggests this isn't random. Someone specifically targeting American EOD capabilities, systematically eliminating our best operators.
They're building a network of weapons caches protected by devices designed to kill anyone who tries to disarm them. Kate felt the familiar weight of old responsibilities settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. How long do I have to decide? Team deploys in 18 hours. If you're coming, we need to know now. Delacroix handed her a secure satellite phone, the kind used for communications in areas where conventional signals couldn't penetrate. But Catherine, there's something else you need to know. We have reason to believe the person building these devices is someone with intimate knowledge of your team's operations in Afghanistan. Someone who knew exactly how you worked, how you thought, how you approached problems that couldn't be solved by conventional methods. The implication hit Kate like a physical blow. Someone hadn't just studied her techniques. They'd used that knowledge to build the trap that killed her team, and now they were using it again, creating weapons specifically designed to kill people who thought like she did, who approached problems the way she had taught them to do it. "Give me 2 hours," Kate said finally. Delacroix nodded and headed toward the door, his team automatically falling into escort formation. At the threshold, he turned back one final time. "Catherine, I know what happened in Afghanistan changed you. It changed all of us. But running away from what you are doesn't honor the people we lost. It just makes their deaths meaningless." As the convoy disappeared down the gravel road, Kate stood alone in the garage, surrounded by the comfortable fiction of her civilian life. But in her mind, she was already calculating blast radii, analyzing trigger mechanisms, and preparing for a confrontation with someone who'd turned her own expertise into a weapon designed to kill her.
2 hours later, Kate sat in the hidden workshop beneath Morrison's auto and scrap, staring at files she hadn't opened in 8 years. The documents were stored in a fireproof safe behind her chemical analysis station, sealed in waterproof containers that had traveled from Afghanistan to Colorado via routes that didn't appear on any official shipping manifests. Personnel records, disciplinary actions, psychological evaluations indicating susceptibility to external influence, the kind of vulnerability markers that made people attractive targets for hostile recruitment. The answer came in a supplemental intelligence report dated 6 months before her team's deployment. A former Iraqi military engineer named Dr. Hassan Nazir had been captured during a raid on a suspected bomb-making facility. Under interrogation, Nazir revealed that he'd been recruited by a network of insurgent groups to develop advanced improvised explosives specifically designed to counter American EOD procedures. His background included training at the Iraqi Military Academy's engineering program and 4 years working with Soviet advisors who'd shared classified information about Western military tactics. The American contractor's identity had been classified at a level above Kate's clearance, but reading the report now, she recognized patterns that made her blood run cold. The devices described in the intelligence assessment incorporated techniques that had been developed during her team's training at Fort Belvoir. Specific approaches to multi-stage triggers, particular methods for concealing secondary charges, unique ways of incorporating electronic components that could only have come from classified training materials. Someone with access to her team's training records had provided insurgents with a blueprint for killing American EOD specialists. Someone who knew exactly how Kate Morrison approached problems that couldn't be solved by conventional methods had turned that knowledge into a weapon designed to kill her. Kate pulled out a secure laptop and connected to networks that officially didn't exist, using access codes that should have been deactivated years ago, but apparently remained active. Military personnel databases, classified mission reports, intelligence assessments from operations that had never been publicly acknowledged. The digital paper trail of America's shadow wars stretched before her like a maze of interconnected secrets. The first search was simple, cross-referencing personnel with access to her team's training records against individuals who'd been deployed to Iraq during the relevant time period. The results were manageable, fewer than 30 names, most of whom Kate recognized as instructors, support personnel, or logistics coordinators who had legitimate reasons for accessing classified EOD materials. The second search was more specific.
identifying individuals who'd left military service under circumstances that might suggest recruitment by foreign intelligence agencies or criminal organizations, financial difficulties, disciplinary actions, psychological evaluations indicating susceptibility to external influence, the kind of vulnerability markers that made people attractive targets for hostile recruitment.
One name appeared on both lists. Colonel Patricia Hawkins had been Kate's commanding officer during advanced EOD training at Fort Belvoir. A career officer with 22 years of service, Hawkins had been responsible for developing many of the techniques Kate's team had used in Afghanistan. She'd supervised their training, approved their deployment, and had access to every classified document related to their operational capabilities. According to her personnel file, Hawkins had retired from active duty 6 months after Kate's team was killed in Afghanistan. The official reason was medical, complications from injuries sustained during an IED attack in Baghdad. But Kate found discrepancies in the timeline that didn't add up. Hawkins had been stateside during the period when she was supposedly injured in Iraq. Her medical records showed treatment for stress-related disorders, not combat injuries. More troubling was what Kate found in financial databases that tracked offshore banking transactions. 6 months after her retirement, Hawkins had made a series of large deposits to accounts in countries known for banking secrecy. The amounts were substantial, more money than a retired colonel should have been able to accumulate through legitimate means. Kate cross-referenced the dates of those deposits against known intelligence operations in the region. The timeline aligned perfectly with the period when Dr. Hassan Nazir had been developing advanced IEDs with assistance from his mysterious American contractor. The money trail suggested that Hawkins hadn't just provided technical information, she'd been paid handsomely for betraying the people she'd trained. The secure satellite phone Frank had given her buzzed with an encrypted message. Decision time. Deployment window closing. Need answer now. Kate stared at the evidence spread across her workbench like components of a device she was trying to disarm. Patricia Hawkins had sold her team's lives for money, providing insurgents with the knowledge they needed to build traps specifically designed to kill American EOD specialists. The devices that had murdered her teammates weren't just sophisticated improvised explosives, they were weapons built using her own training materials, turned against the people she'd served alongside. But Hawkins hadn't stopped there. The current crisis in Syria suggested she was still active, still providing hostile forces with classified information about American military capabilities. The devices Frank's teams had encountered in Syria bore the same signatures Kate had seen in Afghanistan. The same attention to detail, the same understanding of EOD procedures, the same artistic precision that came from someone who'd helped write the tactical manual being used against them. Kate picked up the satellite phone and typed a brief response. "I'm in. But we do this my way." Within minutes, her phone rang. Frank's voice carried the relief of someone who'd been holding his breath for hours. "Thank God. We'll pick you up in 30 minutes. Gear up for extended deployment. Desert environment, hostile territory, no backup available." "Frank, there's something you need to know before we deploy." Kate pulled up the intelligence files on her laptop, preparing to share information that would change everything about their mission. The person building these devices isn't just someone with access to classified materials, it's someone who trained our people, someone who knows our capabilities better than we do because she helped develop them. She? Colonel Patricia Hawkins. She was my commanding officer during advanced EOD training, had access to everything about how my team operated, and according to financial records I've been able to trace, she's been selling that information to hostile forces for the past 8 years. Frank was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "You're certain. Dead certain. The devices your teams encountered in Syria weren't just sophisticated, they were built using training materials Hawkins developed. She's not just providing intelligence, Frank. She's actively designing weapons to kill American soldiers."
Then we bring her in, take her down along with the weapons cache. Kate looked around the workshop that had been her sanctuary for 8 years, knowing she was about to leave it behind for a mission that might end the same way her last deployment had. But this time, she knew who the enemy was. This time, she could prepare for a confrontation with someone who understood her methods as well as she did. No, Frank. We don't take her down. We let her think she's still one step ahead while we dismantle everything she's built. And when we're finished, Patricia Hawkins is going to learn what happens when you turn someone's training against the people they died protecting. Kate began packing equipment that hadn't seen action in 8 years, but the hands moving across tools and weapons belonged to Sergeant First Class Catherine Morrison. The mechanic from Pine Ridge was already a memory.
The military transport aircraft flew through Middle Eastern airspace at 37,000 feet. Its interior configured for rapid deployment rather than passenger comfort. Kate sat in a jump seat along the fuselage wall, surrounded by equipment that would have made civilian airport security very nervous. Her gear bag contained specialized tools that didn't appear in any standard military manual, devices she'd developed during her years of active service, refined during her time in civilian exile, and modified for purposes that required creativity more than protocol. Frank Delacroix occupied the seat across from her, reviewing mission parameters on a ruggedized tablet while his team conducted final equipment checks. The other 5 Green Berets moved with the practiced efficiency of operators who'd worked together long enough to communicate through glances and gestures. Kate recognized the dynamic, the particular trust that developed between people who depended on each other in situations where teamwork meant survival and mistakes meant body bags. Mission briefing, Frank announced, activating a secure display screen mounted to the aircraft's bulkhead. Satellite imagery appeared showing a compound in eastern Syria, nestled between rocky hills that provided natural camouflage from aerial observation. Target is a weapons cache operated by a coalition of insurgent groups with financial backing from sources we're still trying to identify. Intelligence indicates the facility contains advanced improvised explosive devices being distributed to cells throughout the region. Kate studied the compound's layout with professional interest. The main building was surrounded by secondary structures that could serve as workshops, storage facilities, or living quarters for personnel. Vehicle tracks indicated regular traffic, but the pattern suggested operational security measures, arrivals and departures at irregular intervals, routes that avoided predictable patterns. "What's the timeline?" asked Staff Sergeant Miguel Reeves, the team's communications specialist. "Syrian government forces are planning a major offensive in this sector within 72 hours, Frank replied. "If we don't secure or destroy the cache before then, it disappears into the chaos of active combat operations. This is our only window." Sergeant Tommy Liu leaned forward from his position near the aircraft's rear ramp. Kate's breath caught as she recognized him, older now, bearing new scars and the particular weariness that came from too many deployments, but unmistakably the electronic specialist who'd served on her team in Afghanistan. He'd been listed as killed in action in the official reports, but apparently Tommy Liu had been as skilled at surviving impossible situations as he'd been at tracing wiring through concrete walls. "Kate," Tommy's voice carried 8 years of questions that couldn't be answered in the time they had available. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Makes 2 of us." Kate's response was carefully neutral, but she could see Tommy reading her expression, the way he'd once read electronic circuits, looking for connections that weren't immediately obvious. "Thought you were dead." "Got lucky. Blast threw me clear before the secondary charges detonated. Spent 6 months in a military hospital learning to walk again, another year in psychological rehabilitation learning to sleep without nightmares." Tommy's smile was grim. "Frank found me working private security in Iraq, convinced me to come back and finish what we started." Kate felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd spent 8 years believing she was the only member of her team to survive the ambush in Afghanistan, carrying the burden of their deaths alone. Learning that Tommy had also survived changed nothing about what had happened, but it shifted her understanding of what was possible. "How many others?" she asked. "Just us," Frank replied. "Maria Santos, David Chen, Emma Rodriguez, they didn't make it out. The blast that got you and Tommy was the secondary explosion. The primary charges that killed the others were designed specifically to prevent survival." Kate processed this information with the clinical detachment she'd learned to apply to traumatic memories. 3 teammates confirmed dead, 2 survivors who'd spent years believing the other was also killed.
All of them brought together again for a mission that involved confronting the person responsible for the original tragedy. The symmetry was either cosmic justice or elaborate revenge. She wasn't sure which. "What's the tactical situation at the target?" Kate asked, redirecting her focus to operational details that she could analyze without emotional complications.
Frank switched the display to thermal imaging from recent reconnaissance flights. Compound is occupied by approximately 15 to 20 personnel, rotating shifts that suggest 24-hour operations. No heavy weapons visible, but defensive positions are well constructed and positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. The main challenge isn't the human opposition. The display switched to photographs that made Kate's blood run cold. Improvised explosive devices of extraordinary sophistication, incorporating elements that demonstrated intimate knowledge of American military procedures. Multi-stage triggers, redundant fail-safes, component arrangements that Kate recognized from her own training materials, devices built not just to kill, but to kill people who thought like she did. "Patricia Hawkins has been busy," Kate murmured, studying the construction techniques visible in the reconnaissance photos. "How can you be certain she's involved?" asked Corporal Danny Walsh, the team's youngest member. Kate pointed to specific details in the photographs, the particular way wires were routed, the placement of electronic components, the artistic precision of the overall design. "This is her signature." Hawkins always said that properly constructed explosives were a form of engineering art. She taught us to approach device construction like sculpture, every component placed with purpose, every connection serving both functional and aesthetic goals. "She's also teaching others," Tommy added, pulling up additional intelligence on his own tablet. "We've identified similar devices in 3 other countries over the past 18 months. The techniques are spreading, being adapted for local conditions, but maintaining the same core principles." Frank leaned back in his jump seat, studying Kate's face with the intensity of someone trying to read an instrument panel in low light. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Are you ready for this? Not just tactically, but psychologically. Because if Hawkins is at that compound, if she's the one building these devices, then this mission becomes personal in ways that could compromise operational effectiveness." Kate considered the question with the same methodical approach she'd once applied to analyzing explosive devices. Her emotional state was complicated: anger at being betrayed, grief for teammates who died because of that betrayal, fear that she might not be as skilled as she'd once been after 8 years of civilian life. But underneath those complications was something simpler and more reliable: professional competence that had been honed through years of dealing with problems that couldn't be solved by conventional methods. "I'm ready," she said finally. "But we do this smart. Hawkins knows how I think, how I approach problems, how I make decisions under pressure. She's had 8 years to develop countermeasures for every technique I used in Afghanistan. If we go in using standard EOD procedures, we're walking into a trap designed specifically for me." "What do you recommend?" asked Frank. Kate smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We give her exactly what she expects, right up until the moment we don't. Hawkins trained me to think like her, to approach problems the way she would, but she's never seen what I learned during 8 years of civilian life. What happens when you combine military training with the kind of creative problem-solving you develop when you're maintaining equipment that officially doesn't exist." The aircraft began its descent toward a classified airfield somewhere in Kurdish-controlled territory. Outside the small windows, Kate could see the harsh landscape of eastern Syria stretching toward the horizon like a moonscape of stone and sand. Somewhere in that wasteland was a woman who had betrayed everything Kate had once believed in, who had turned their shared knowledge into weapons designed to kill the people they'd sworn to protect. But Patricia Hawkins had made one crucial mistake. She assumed that Sergeant First Class Catherine Morrison was the most dangerous version of the woman she had trained. She was about to discover that Kate Morrison, the mechanic who'd spent 8 years learning to fix things that were broken beyond conventional repair, was capable of approaches that didn't appear in any military manual. The mission was about to begin, and for the first time in 8 years, Kate felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The Kurdish safe house sat on a hillside overlooking the Syrian border, its stone walls weathered by decades of desert wind and periodic artillery fire. Kate stood in what had once been a living room, now converted into a tactical operations center, complete with satellite communication equipment, digital mapping displays, and weapons racks that would have impressed a small army. Through bulletproof windows, she could see the target compound 12 kilometers to the south, a cluster of buildings that looked innocent enough from a distance, but contained enough explosive expertise to destabilize the entire region.
Frank spread reconnaissance photos across a folding table, each image marked with tactical annotations in the precise handwriting of someone who'd learned that sloppy intelligence got people killed. Surveillance indicates the compound operates on a rotating schedule. Peak activity occurs between 0400 and 0600 local time, when new devices are moved to vehicles for distribution. That's our window. Kate studied the photographs with the methodical attention she had once applied to pre-mission equipment checks. The compound's layout suggested someone with military engineering background had designed the defensive positions: overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes, structures positioned to channel attackers into kill zones. But there were also vulnerabilities that spoke to civilian contractors who understood explosives better than they understood tactical security. Guard rotation patterns? Asked Tommy Liu, setting up electronic surveillance equipment that could monitor communications within a 5-kilometer radius. Every 4 hours, but not synchronized between positions, Frank replied. Someone trained them well enough to avoid predictable schedules, but not well enough to maintain professional discipline. We've observed guards leaving positions early, sleeping during duty shifts, and using radio communications that violate basic operational security. Kate nodded, recognizing the signature of Patricia Hawkins' training methods. During their time at Fort Bulver, Hawkins had emphasized technical excellence over tactical discipline, focusing on creating superior explosive devices rather than training personnel who could protect them effectively. It was a blind spot that Kate intended to exploit. "What about the devices themselves?" she asked. "How are they positioned around the compound?" Frank switched to thermal imaging that revealed heat signatures from electronic components scattered throughout the target area. The pattern was sophisticated but not random, devices placed according to mathematical principles that Kate recognized from advanced EOD training. Minimum of 15 separate explosive devices, configured in overlapping blast patterns that would prevent conventional approach routes. Whoever designed this understood exactly how assault teams would try to breach the compound. Kate traced potential approach routes with her finger, calculating blast radii and identifying dead zones where the defensive systems had gaps. The placement was brilliant from a technical standpoint, but revealed something crucial about the person who designed it. They were thinking like an instructor creating a training exercise rather than a soldier preparing for actual combat. "Hawkins always said that perfect defense was impossible," Kate murmured, studying the thermopatterns. "She taught us that every defensive system has weaknesses, but the key is making those weaknesses too small or too dangerous for attackers to exploit. The problem is, she's designed this like a classroom demonstration, not a real-world fortification." Tommy looked up from his equipment. "Meaning?" "Meaning she's showing off. The device placement is mathematically elegant, but tactically inefficient. She could have achieved the same defensive capability with half as many explosives positioned according to terrain features rather than geometric principles." Kate pointed to specific locations where the defensive pattern created unnecessary complexity. "She's not just protecting the compound, she's demonstrating her technical expertise to whoever's paying for these weapons." Frank studied Kate's analysis with the intensity of someone whose team's survival depended on accurate intelligence. "Can you exploit that?" Kate felt the familiar surge of professional confidence that had once made her the Army's most effective EOD specialist. After 8 years of civilian life, she had wondered if her skills had deteriorated, if the edge that had kept her alive through impossible missions had been dulled by routine maintenance work on pickup trucks and farm equipment. But looking at Hawkins' defensive pattern, she could see solutions that existed outside conventional military doctrine. "I can do better than exploit it," she said. "I can turn it against her." Hawkins designed the system assuming that anyone attacking the compound would follow standard assault protocols. But there are approaches that don't appear in any tactical manual, methods I developed during my time in Pine Ridge that combine military training with civilian mechanical expertise.
She moved to the weapons rack and selected equipment that most operators would have considered unconventional for an assault mission: a mechanic's toolkit, electronic testing equipment, and components that could be assembled into devices that served purposes beyond their original design. Kate had learned during her years of exile that the best solutions often came from combining tools in ways their manufacturers had never intended. "What's the plan?" Frank asked. Kate spread a detailed topographical map across the table, marking positions with the precision of someone who'd once navigated minefields by moonlight. "We don't assault the compound. We don't breach the defensive perimeter. We don't even approach the building where the explosive devices are stored." Tommy frowned. "Then how do we complete the mission?" Kate smiled with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd found an elegant solution to an impossible problem. "We let Patricia Hawkins' own expertise destroy everything she's built. She's created a defensive system that's technically perfect but operationally vulnerable to someone who understands both military procedures and civilian mechanical systems. We're going to convince her defensive devices to detonate themselves in a sequence that eliminates the threat while providing evidence of who was responsible." Frank studied the plan Kate outlined on the map, noting approach routes that avoided the compound entirely while targeting infrastructure systems that supported the defensive network. "This is completely outside standard operating procedures. Standard procedures get people killed when you're dealing with someone who helped write the standard procedures," Kate replied. "Hawkins knows every conventional approach we might use because she trained the people who developed those approaches. But she's never seen what happens when you combine explosive ordnance disposal techniques with 8 years of experience fixing engines that shouldn't work and maintaining equipment that officially doesn't exist." The team spent the next 6 hours conducting final preparations. Kate modified standard military equipment with components from her civilian toolkit, creating hybrid devices that could serve multiple purposes depending on the tactical situation. Tommy reconfigured his electronic surveillance gear to interface with systems it had never been designed to monitor. Frank coordinated with Kurdish forces who would provide overwatch and extraction support if the mission went catastrophically wrong. As the sun set over the Syrian desert, Kate felt the familiar transformation that had once marked the transition from training to combat operations. The careful control she'd maintained over her civilian identity was dissolving, replaced by the focused intensity of someone who'd learned to function in environments where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and casualty reports. "One more thing," Frank said, as the team prepared to depart. "If we encounter Hawkins during this operation, what are your intentions?" Kate considered the question with the same methodical approach she'd once applied to analyzing trigger mechanisms. Patricia Hawkins had betrayed everything Kate had believed in, had used their shared knowledge to build weapons designed to kill American soldiers, had turned the training meant to protect people into expertise for destroying them. The anger was real, the desire for revenge was understandable, but neither emotion would help complete the mission successfully. "I'm going to stop her," Kate said finally. "Whatever that requires, however it has to happen, Patricia Hawkins doesn't leave Syria with the ability to build more weapons. But we do this professionally, according to military standards, with evidence that will stand up to investigation by people who need to understand exactly what happened here." Frank nodded, recognizing the distinction between personal vengeance and professional duty. "Let's move out." As the team departed the safe house under cover of darkness, Kate felt the weight of 8 years of civilian life falling away like discarded camouflage. The mechanic from Pine Ridge, Colorado had been a necessary fiction, a mask worn by someone who needed time to heal from wounds that went deeper than physical injury. But Sergeant First Class Catherine Morrison was about to engage in the kind of mission she'd been trained for, against an enemy who'd made the fight personal by turning her own expertise into a weapon for killing the people she'd sworn to protect. The final confrontation with Patricia Hawkins was about to begin, and Kate intended to finish what had been started 8 years ago in a desert compound where good people had died because of betrayal and greed.
The approach to the compound took 3 hours through terrain that looked like the surface of a hostile planet. Kate and her team moved through rocky wadis and along ridgelines that provided concealment from thermal imaging, while avoiding the obvious routes that would be monitored by perimeter security. The desert night was cold enough to make their breath visible, but Kate felt the familiar warmth that came from operating in an environment where her skills were perfectly matched to the mission requirements. 2 kilometers from the target, Kate called a halt and established overwatch position behind a cluster of boulders that provided both cover and clear lines of sight to the compound below. Through night vision equipment, she could see the facility's defensive positions exactly as they'd appeared in reconnaissance photographs, mathematically precise, technically elegant, and revealing more about their designer than Patricia Hawkins had probably intended. "Electronic signatures confirm 15 active devices," Tommy reported, monitoring emissions from the compound's defensive network. "But there's something else. I'm detecting communication signals that don't match standard explosive device telemetry."
Kate studied the readouts on Tommy's equipment, recognizing patterns that made her blood run cold. The defensive devices weren't just positioned to protect the compound, they were connected to a central control system that could coordinate their detonation according to predetermined sequences. Hawkins hadn't just built a defensive network, she'd created a demonstration system that could showcase her capabilities to potential buyers. She's running a live auction, Kate realized. Those communication signals are streaming real-time data to remote locations. Hawkins is showing prospective clients exactly how her devices work by using them to protect an active weapons cache. Frank lowered his binoculars, processing the implications. How many potential buyers? Tommy adjusted his equipment to track the outgoing data streams. Multiple encrypted channels, different satellite networks, at least 6 separate recipients, possibly more using relay systems to conceal their locations. Kate felt the scope of Hawkins' betrayal expanding like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. This wasn't just about selling weapons to insurgent groups in Syria. Hawkins had built a global network for distributing advanced explosive devices to anyone willing to pay her prices, using the compound as a live demonstration facility where potential customers could observe her products in operational conditions. "We need to identify those buyers," Kate said. "If we just destroy the compound, Hawkins disappears and starts over somewhere else with a client list that includes every terrorist organization and hostile intelligence service willing to pay for American military secrets." Frank studied the compound through his rifle scope, noting guard positions and patrol patterns that suggested the facility operated with confidence in its defensive capabilities. "What do you recommend?" Kate pulled out the modified equipment she'd assembled during mission preparation, devices that combined standard military electronics with civilian mechanical components in ways that created capabilities no manufacturer had ever intended. "Can you penetrate their communication network?" Tommy asked, recognizing some of the components Kate was connecting together. "Better than that, I can make their system broadcast everything to locations they don't know about while maintaining the appearance of normal operation." Kate's fingers moved across the device's controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years maintaining equipment that officially didn't exist. "Hawkins trained me to think systematically about complex problems, but she never saw what I learned about creative mechanical solutions during 8 years of fixing things that shouldn't work." The plan Kate outlined was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking the compound directly, they would penetrate its communication network and use Hawkins' own demonstration system to broadcast evidence of her activities to intelligence agencies throughout the Western world. Every potential buyer observing the demonstration would be identified, every technical specification would be recorded, and every financial transaction would be traced through banking networks that specialize in tracking terrorist funding. "Implementation window?" Frank asked.
Kate checked her modified equipment one final time, ensuring that every connection was secure and every component was functioning according to specifications that existed nowhere in official technical manuals. Hawkins runs her demonstrations during peak activity periods when maximum personnel are present to observe device deployment. That gives us approximately 30 minutes to penetrate the network, upload monitoring software, and extract before the main event begins. Tommy studied the compound's communication patterns on his monitoring equipment. "I can provide electronic overwatch, jamming their security frequencies if they detect the network intrusion, but once we start broadcasting their demonstration to intelligence agencies, they'll know someone has compromised their system." "That's when things get interesting," Kate replied, because Patricia Hawkins is about to discover that her former student learned a few techniques that don't appear in any training manual. The team moved toward the compound, using approaches Kate had developed by combining military infiltration techniques with mechanical problem-solving methods. Instead of following standard tactical doctrine, they used civilian maintenance procedures to access infrastructure systems that supported the facility's operations. Power distribution networks, communication relays, water supply systems, civilian components that military defensive planning often overlooked because they seemed too mundane to represent security vulnerabilities. Kate reached the compound's main communication relay at 0347 hours, exactly 13 minutes before Hawkins' demonstration was scheduled to begin. The relay station was protected by standard security measures, motion sensors, infrared cameras, automated alert systems that would notify guards if unauthorized personnel approached the equipment. But the systems had been designed to detect military assault teams, not someone with automotive repair expertise who understood how to modify electronic components without triggering their security protocols. She connected her modified device to the communication relay using techniques that combined electronic warfare training with civilian mechanical skills. Within minutes, Kate had penetrated Hawkins' network and begun uploading monitoring software that would record every aspect of the upcoming demonstration while broadcasting the data to intelligence agencies that specialized in tracking terrorist activities. Network penetration successful, Kate reported through her tactical radio. Data stream established. Now we wait for Patricia Hawkins to incriminate herself in front of an audience that includes people who want to arrest her. Through her infiltration equipment, Kate could monitor communications within the compound as Hawkins prepared for her demonstration. The woman's voice was older than Kate remembered, bearing the particular stress patterns that came from years of looking over one's shoulder, but unmistakably the commanding officer who'd once trained her to approach impossible problems with systematic precision. Demonstration commencing in 10 minutes. All devices armed and ready for sequential detonation. Client observers are confirmed online and receiving full telemetry. This showcase should generate enough interest to fund operations for the next 18 months. Kate felt the familiar surge of anger that always accompanied thoughts of her teammates who died because of Hawkins' betrayal. But anger was a luxury she couldn't afford during active operations. Instead, she channeled that emotional energy into professional focus, preparing for a confrontation that would require every skill she'd developed during years of military service and civilian exile. Frank, we have confirmation. Hawkins is about to demonstrate her weapons to multiple buyers while broadcasting evidence of her activities to intelligence agencies worldwide. When this demonstration ends, she'll either be dead or in custody, and her entire network will be exposed. Frank's response carried the satisfaction of someone whose long hunt was finally approaching its conclusion. Copy that. Maintain position and document everything. Patricia Hawkins is about to learn what happens when you betray the people who trusted you with their lives. As the demonstration began, Kate watched through her monitoring equipment as Hawkins showcased devices that incorporated training materials from Kate's own military service. Every technique, every innovation, every hard-learned lesson from years of defusing bombs in hostile territory, all of it, turned into weapons for killing American soldiers. But Hawkins had made one crucial mistake. She assumed that Sergeant First Class Catherine Morrison was the most dangerous version of the woman she'd trained. She was about to discover that Kate Morrison, the mechanic who'd spent 8 years learning to solve problems that couldn't be fixed through conventional methods, represented an evolution that no military training could have anticipated.
The demonstration began at exactly 0400 hours with the methodical precision Kate remembered from Patricia Hawkins' training sessions at Fort Belvoir. Through her infiltration equipment, she could monitor communications as Hawkins addressed her remote audience of potential buyers, terrorist organizations, hostile intelligence services, and criminal networks that specialized in acquiring military-grade weapons for purposes that didn't appear in any legitimate defense contracts. Gentlemen, what you are about to observe represents the evolution of improvised explosive device technology. Hawkins' voice carried the confident authority of someone who'd spent decades perfecting techniques for controlled destruction. These devices incorporate classified American military procedures turned against the personnel who developed them. Each component has been tested under operational conditions and proven effective against conventional disposal methods. Kate felt the familiar surge of anger that always accompanied reminders of how her training had been weaponized against American forces, but she channeled that emotional energy into professional focus, monitoring the demonstration while preparing for the moment when documentation would transition to direct action. The first device Hawkins activated was positioned near the compound's main gate, a sophisticated improvised explosive designed to appear like standard insurgent construction while incorporating elements that would defeat conventional EOD approaches. Kate watched through thermal imaging as the device's electronic components heated up according to activation sequences she recognized from her own training materials. Note the multi-stage trigger mechanism. Hawkins continued her narration for the remote buyers. Primary detection sensors identify approaching personnel using movement patterns consistent with American military doctrine. Secondary systems analyze electronic signatures from standard bomb disposal equipment. The device arms itself only when both conditions are met, ensuring activation occurs during actual disposal attempts rather than random personnel movement. Tommy Lou's monitoring equipment detected the buyers' responses as they observed the demonstration through encrypted video feeds. Financial institutions in 17 countries were processing preliminary transactions, suggesting that Hawkins' audience included organizations with substantial funding and immediate operational requirements for advanced explosive devices. Kate studied the demonstration through her own equipment, recognizing techniques that had been developed to save lives now being showcased as methods for ending them. The irony was deliberate. Hawkins wasn't just selling weapons, she was demonstrating her complete betrayal of everything she'd once represented by turning protective knowledge into destructive capability. Frank, I'm detecting movement near the compound's secondary building. Personnel are preparing additional devices for demonstration. This isn't just a sales presentation, they're conducting live field testing of multiple weapon systems. Frank's response carried the tension of someone whose team was positioned dangerously close to an active explosive testing facility. Copy that. How long before we can move to direct action phase? Kate checked her modified equipment, confirming that her network penetration was successfully recording all aspects of the demonstration while broadcasting evidence to intelligence agencies throughout the Western world. Data collection is proceeding according to plan. But Frank, there's something else. The devices they're testing tonight, they're not just for sale to foreign buyers. According to the communication intercepts I'm monitoring, Hawkins has been contracted to deploy similar weapons against American targets within the next 30 days. The implications hit Frank like a physical blow. Domestic terrorism. Worse. Someone's paying Hawkins to conduct operations on American soil using techniques developed to kill American EOD specialists. This isn't just about selling weapons to foreign insurgents. Someone wants to bring this technology home. Kate's infiltration equipment intercepted financial data showing payment schedules that suggested domestic operations were already funded and in advanced planning stages. Bank transfers from shell companies traced to organizations with histories of anti-government activities, target reconnaissance reports for federal facilities, and procurement records for components that could only be used to construct large-scale explosive devices. We need to abort the observation phase and move to direct interdiction, Kate decided. If we allow this demonstration to continue, Hawkins completes her sales presentation and disappears with enough funding to conduct terrorist operations against American targets. Frank coordinated with his team through tactical radio, while Kate began modifying her equipment for transition from passive surveillance to active electronic warfare. The plan she had developed during mission preparation had anticipated this possibility that observation alone wouldn't be sufficient to prevent immediate threats to American security.
Tommy, can you jam their communication systems without alerting the buyers that we've compromised their network? Kate asked. Tommy studied his monitoring equipment, analyzing signal patterns and encryption protocols with the expertise of someone who'd spent years intercepting enemy communications. Affirmative. I can introduce gradual signal degradation that appears like atmospheric interference rather than active jamming. The buyers will assume they're experiencing technical difficulties rather than recognizing electronic warfare. Kate began the transition from documentation to direct action, using her modified equipment to penetrate deeper into Hawkins' network, while maintaining the appearance of normal system operation. Her approach combined electronic warfare techniques with mechanical sabotage methods she'd developed during years of maintaining equipment that officially didn't exist. Phase 2 commencing, Kate reported. I'm accessing their device control systems. Instead of just recording the demonstration, we're going to take control of it. Through her infiltration equipment, Kate could monitor Hawkins' preparation for the second phase of her demonstration, activation of devices designed to showcase advanced anti-handling mechanisms that would kill anyone attempting conventional disposal procedures. But Kate's network penetration had given her access to the same control systems Hawkins was using to coordinate the demonstration. What's the tactical situation? Frank asked, preparing his team for potential combat operations if Kate's electronic warfare approach failed to resolve the threat. Kate studied real-time data from the compound's security systems, noting guard positions and patrol patterns while analyzing defensive capabilities.
15 to 20 personnel, conventional small arms, defensive positions oriented toward external assault rather than internal sabotage. They're confident in their perimeter security but haven't considered the possibility of someone penetrating their network from within their own demonstration systems. Kate activated the next phase of her plan, using Hawkins' own control systems to modify the demonstration in ways that would expose the full scope of the conspiracy while neutralizing the immediate threat. Kate's approach was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking the devices directly, she would turn them against the infrastructure supporting Hawkins' operations. "Hawkins, you always said that perfect security was impossible," Kate murmured as she worked. "You taught me that every system has vulnerabilities, but the key is making those vulnerabilities too small for attackers to exploit. Problem is, you never considered what happens when someone with your training decides to become the attacker." Through her modified equipment, Kate accessed the compound's main power distribution system, using techniques that combined electronic warfare training with civilian electrical expertise. Instead of cutting power to the facility, she began rerouting electrical flow in ways that would overload specific systems while maintaining apparent normal operation. The first indication that something was wrong came when Hawkins' third demonstration device failed to activate according to its programmed sequence. Kate had modified its control signals to include feedback loops that would prevent activation while generating error messages that appeared like random technical failures. "Technical difficulties," Hawkins announced to her remote audience, her voice carrying the first hints of concern. "Stand by while we troubleshoot the system." Kate smiled as she continued her systematic sabotage of Hawkins' demonstration, using the woman's own training against her in ways that no conventional military doctrine would have anticipated. Every technique Hawkins had taught her about systematic problem-solving was being applied to the systematic destruction of everything Hawkins had built. "Frank, I've gained control of their demonstration systems." Hawkins is about to discover that her former student learned a few techniques that don't appear in any training manual, beginning final phase operations now. As Kate initiated the final sequence of her electronic warfare campaign, she felt the satisfaction of someone who'd spent 8 years preparing for this exact moment. Patricia Hawkins had betrayed everything Kate had believed in, had used their shared knowledge to kill American soldiers, and had turned the training meant to protect people into expertise for destroying them. But Hawkins had underestimated what her former student had learned during years of civilian exile. Kate Morrison, the mechanic from Pine Ridge, Colorado, was about to demonstrate that the most dangerous opponents weren't always the ones who followed conventional procedures. The final confrontation was beginning, and Kate intended to finish it on her own terms.
Kate's electronic warfare campaign reached critical mass at 04:27 hours when Patricia Hawkins' demonstration system began behaving in ways that no conventional sabotage could have achieved. Instead of simply disabling the explosive devices, Kate had reprogrammed their control systems to execute sequences that would expose the full scope of Hawkins' conspiracy, while providing irrefutable evidence of her betrayal. "System malfunction in Sector 7, came Hawkins' voice through the intercepted communications, tension replacing the confident authority she'd maintained throughout the early phases of her demonstration. "Device activation protocols are not responding to manual override commands." Kate smiled as she watched her systematic sabotage unfold through multiple monitoring systems. The devices Hawkins had designed to showcase her technical expertise were now broadcasting detailed schematics, construction methods, and operational parameters to intelligence agencies throughout the Western world. Every classified technique Hawkins had stolen was being documented and transmitted to organizations that specialized in tracking terrorist activities. "Frank, data transmission is proceeding beyond optimal parameters," Kate reported through her tactical radio. "We're not just exposing Hawkins' current operations, we're uploading her entire technical database to counterterrorism networks. Every device she's ever built, every technique she's developed, every client she's worked with over the past 8 years. Frank's response carried the satisfaction of someone whose long hunt was finally approaching its conclusion. "Copy that. What's the timeline for completion?" Kate checked her modified equipment, monitoring data flow rates and network penetration depth, while analyzing Hawkins' increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of her own systems. 12 minutes to complete evidence upload.
But Frank, there's something else. The financial data I'm accessing shows payments for domestic operations that are scheduled to begin within 72 hours. We're not just preventing future attacks, we're stopping ones that are already in motion. Through her infiltration equipment, Kate could monitor communications as Hawkins coordinated with her staff to address what they assumed were random technical failures. But the pattern of system malfunctions was too sophisticated for conventional troubleshooting, incorporating elements that required knowledge of both the device's construction and the network infrastructure supporting them. Power distribution anomalies in the main facility, reported one of Hawkins' technicians. Electrical flow patterns are not consistent with normal operational parameters. Kate had spent the past 30 minutes systematically rerouting power through the compound's infrastructure, using techniques that combined electronic warfare training with civilian electrical expertise she'd developed during years of maintaining equipment that officially didn't exist. Instead of cutting power to critical systems, she was overloading specific components while maintaining apparent normal operation. Tommy, I need you to coordinate with intelligence agencies that are receiving our data stream. Tell them to prepare tactical teams for immediate deployment to addresses I'm about to provide. Hawkins' domestic operations are using safe houses that are identified in the financial records we're uploading. Tommy's monitoring equipment showed confirmation signals from multiple intelligence agencies as they received real-time evidence of terrorist activities planned against American targets. FBI counterterrorism units, Homeland Security tactical teams, and military special operations forces were being dispatched to locations throughout the continental United States, based on information Kate was extracting from Hawkins' network. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Hawkins hadn't just been selling weapons to foreign buyers. She'd been coordinating a systematic campaign of domestic terrorism designed to demonstrate her capabilities while generating demand for her services. Federal buildings, military installations, and civilian infrastructure had been targeted for attacks that would showcase the effectiveness of devices built using classified American military techniques. Catherine, we have a problem. Frank's voice carried urgent concern. Thermal imaging shows personnel evacuating the main compound. Hawkins may have realized that her system compromise goes beyond random technical failures. Kate studied real-time surveillance data from the compound's security cameras, watching as Hawkins' staff began implementing emergency evacuation procedures with the efficiency of people who'd rehearsed for exactly this situation. But their movements were being tracked by monitoring systems Kate had inserted into their network, providing intelligence agencies with detailed information about escape routes, vehicle identification, and communication protocols. Let them run, Kate decided. Every movement they make is being tracked and transmitted to people who specialize in hunting terrorists. Hawkins can escape her personnel, but she can't escape the evidence we're broadcasting about her activities.
Through her modified equipment, Kate accessed the compound's main communication system and began the final phase of her electronic warfare campaign. Instead of just documenting Hawkins's crimes, she was going to force a direct confrontation with the woman who'd betrayed everything she'd once represented. Kate activated the compound's public address system and spoke directly to Patricia Hawkins for the first time in 8 years. Hello, Patricia. This is Catherine Morrison. I believe you remember me. The response was immediate. Stunned silence followed by frantic activity as Hawkins's staff realized their security had been completely compromised by someone with intimate knowledge of their systems. You always taught me that perfect security was impossible, Kate continued, her voice echoing through the compound's corridors with the calm authority of someone who held complete tactical advantage. You said the key was making vulnerabilities too small for attackers to exploit, but you never considered what happens when the attacker knows your systems as well as you do. Hawkins's voice came through the communications system, older and bearing the stress patterns that came from years of looking over one's shoulder, but unmistakably the commanding officer who'd once trained Kate to approach impossible problems with systematic precision. "Catherine, I wondered when you'd surface again. Afghanistan should have taught you the dangers of trusting the wrong people." Kate felt the familiar surge of anger that always accompanied thoughts of her teammates who died because of Hawkins's betrayal. But she channeled that emotional energy into professional focus, preparing for a confrontation that would require every skill she'd developed during years of military service and civilian exile. "Afghanistan taught me exactly what happens when people betray the trust of those they're supposed to protect," Kate replied. "Maria Santos, David Chen, Emma Rodriguez, they died because you sold our operational procedures to people who used that information to build traps specifically designed to kill us. They died because war is unpredictable and soldiers are expendable," Hawkins responded with the cold calculation that once masked her deeper betrayal. "I simply found a way to monetize knowledge that would otherwise have been wasted on people who were going to die anyway." Kate's electronic warfare systems completed their final upload sequence, transmitting the last of Hawkins's technical databases to intelligence agencies while simultaneously broadcasting evidence of domestic terrorist operations to law enforcement organizations throughout the United States. Every device Hawkins had built, every technique she'd developed, every client she'd worked with, all of it was now in the hands of people who specialize in hunting terrorists. "Patricia, you made one crucial mistake," Kate said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd spent 8 years preparing for this exact moment. "You assumed that Catherine Morrison was the most dangerous version of the woman you trained. You never considered what I learned during years of civilian life, what happens when you combine military training with the kind of creative problem-solving you develop when you're maintaining equipment that officially doesn't exist." Through her monitoring systems, Kate could see Hawkins's staff completing their evacuation procedures, while their commanding officer remained in the compound's main communication center, apparently determined to confront the former student who'd turned her own expertise against her. "Frank, evidence transmission is complete. Every intelligence agency in the Western world now has detailed information about Hawkins's activities, her clients, and her planned domestic operations. Tactical teams are moving to intercept her personnel at predetermined locations." Frank's response carried the tension of someone whose team was positioned near an increasingly volatile situation. What about Hawkins herself? Kate studied thermal imaging that showed Patricia Hawkins alone in the compound's communication center, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal and facing consequences that had been 8 years in the making. The woman who'd sold American military secrets for personal profit was about to learn what happened when those secrets were turned against her by someone who understood them better than she did. Patricia Hawkins has spent 8 years running from the consequences of her betrayal, Kate spoke, both into her tactical radio and through the compound's communication center. Tonight, she discovers that some debts can't be avoided forever, and some people won't stop hunting until justice is served. The final confrontation between teacher and student was about to begin, and Kate intended to finish it according to the principles Patricia Hawkins had once taught her about systematic problem-solving and complete mission accomplishment. The explosion, when it came, wasn't from any device Patricia Hawkins had built. It was a controlled detonation orchestrated by Kate Morrison, using Hawkins' own explosive network turned against the infrastructure supporting her operations. Instead of destroying the compound in a chaotic blast that would have eliminated evidence along with personnel, Kate had programmed a precise sequence that would neutralize the threat while preserving the intelligence treasure trove contained within the facility's databases. System failure cascade initiated, Kate announced through the compound's communication system as she watched her systematic demolition unfold through thermal imaging. Patricia, you always said that proper engineering required understanding the difference between destruction and controlled failure. Consider this a final lesson in applied explosive ordnance theory. The sequence Kate had programmed was elegant in its precision, each explosive device detonating in calculated intervals that would collapse specific structural elements while leaving the main communication center intact. Hawkins would survive the controlled demolition, but she would emerge into the custody of law enforcement agencies that had been provided with 8 years of evidence documenting her betrayal of American military personnel. Through her monitoring equipment, Kate could see the approach of vehicles that carried no identification but moved with the disciplined coordination of federal tactical teams. FBI counterterrorism units, military special operations forces, and intelligence specialists who'd been tracking Hawkins' network for months were converging on the compound with the overwhelming force that marked high-priority arrests. "Frank, federal agencies are moving to final positions," Kate reported through her tactical radio. "Hawkins won't escape this time, and her entire network is being rolled up simultaneously across 3 continents based on the intelligence we've provided." Frank's response carried the satisfaction of someone whose long hunt was finally reaching its conclusion. "Copy that. What's your extraction plan?" Kate considered the question while watching Patricia Hawkins emerge from the partially collapsed compound, her hands raised in surrender as federal agents surrounded her with weapons drawn. The woman who'd betrayed everything Kate had believed in was finally facing consequences that had been 8 years in the making. "I'm not extracting, Frank. Catherine Morrison died in Afghanistan 8 years ago. Kate Morrison is going home to Pine Ridge, Colorado, where she has an auto repair shop to run and a life to live that doesn't involve hunting traitors through Syrian deserts." Tommy Liu's voice came through the tactical radio, carrying concern that went beyond professional interest. "Kate, you can't just disappear again. The intelligence community needs people with your capabilities. There are other threats out there, other operations that require someone who understands both military procedures and unconventional problem-solving approaches." Kate smiled as she began packing her modified equipment, preparing to disappear back into civilian life, with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to defusing explosive devices. "Tommy, there will always be threats that require unconventional solutions, but there will also always be people willing to step forward when they're needed. My part in this particular story is finished." Through her monitoring systems, Kate watched federal agents processing the scene with professional efficiency. Patricia Hawkins was being transported to a secure facility where she would face charges that included treason, conspiracy to commit terrorist acts, and the murder of American military personnel. Her network of buyers was being arrested simultaneously across 17 countries. The domestic terrorist operations she'd planned were being intercepted before they could be implemented. Most importantly, the classified techniques Hawkins had stolen were now in the hands of people who would use them to protect American forces rather than destroy them. Every device she'd built, every method she'd developed, every innovation she'd created would be analyzed and countered by experts who understood that knowledge belonged to the people who'd earned it through service and sacrifice. Kate's secure satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an intelligence agency that officially didn't exist. "Outstanding work. Position available whenever you're ready to return to active duty. Substantial compensation, unlimited resources, operations that officially never happen." She deleted the message without responding. 6 months later, Morrison's auto and scrap looked exactly as it had before 3 black SUVs had arrived to disrupt Kate's carefully constructed civilian life. The same weathered sign marked the entrance to the same gravel lot where local residents brought vehicles that needed repair by someone who charged fair prices and didn't ask questions about how the damage had occurred. Kate stood in the main garage on a quiet Tuesday morning, hands deep in the engine compartment of Deputy Sheriff Tom Bradley's patrol cruiser, listening to the familiar sounds of a small town where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. The coffee shop's bell chimed as early customers arrived for their caffeine fix. A delivery truck rumbled down Main Street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at something that probably wasn't there. But the hidden workshop beneath the garage floor had been modified during Kate's absence. New equipment occupied workbenches along the walls, communication devices that could reach intelligence networks anywhere in the world, monitoring systems that tracked terrorist activities across multiple continents, and analytical tools that could process threat assessments faster than most government agencies. Kate Morrison had returned to her chosen life as a small-town mechanic, but she maintained capabilities that ensured she could respond if similar situations arose. The woman who fixed pickup trucks and charged honest prices was also someone who could penetrate terrorist networks, expose international conspiracies, and turn classified knowledge into weapons against the people who threatened American security. The secure satellite phone that had once belonged to Frank Delacroix sat in a locked drawer, its battery maintained and its encryption protocols updated through networks that didn't appear on any official communication manifests. Kate checked it once each morning, not because she expected to be needed, but because some responsibilities transcended the boundaries between military service and civilian life. On this particular morning, the phone contained a brief message from Tommy Liu. Quote, "Patricia Hawkins, sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Network completely dismantled. Domestic operations prevented. Thank you." End quote. Kate smiled as she deleted the message and returned her attention to Deputy Bradley's engine, which had developed the particular vibration that indicated worn suspension components. Some problems could be solved with the right tools and sufficient expertise. Others required patience, systematic analysis, and the willingness to work on solutions that might take years to implement completely. The bell above the garage door chimed, and Kate looked up to see a young woman in civilian clothes standing in the entrance. Clean-cut, nervous, with the particular blend of confidence and uncertainty that marked recent military veterans transitioning to civilian life. "Are you Kate Morrison?" the woman asked. Kate wiped her hands on a shop rag, studying the visitor with professional interest. Military bearing was evident in her posture, but something in her expression suggested someone who'd seen enough conflict to appreciate the value of peaceful alternatives. Depends who's asking. "My name is Sarah Chen. I served 3 tours as an EOD specialist in Afghanistan. I've been having some problems adjusting to civilian life, and someone told me you might understand what that's like." Kate felt the familiar recognition that came from meeting someone who'd walked similar paths through dangerous territory. The young woman carried herself with the controlled awareness that marked people who'd learned to function in environments where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and casualty reports. "What kind of problems?" Kate asked. Sarah glanced around the garage, noting the precision with which tools were arranged and the way that every piece of equipment showed signs of meticulous maintenance. The kind that come from knowing how to do things that don't translate well to civilian employment. The kind that make it hard to sleep when you know there are still threats out there that require people with our specific skill sets. Kate moved to the coffee maker in the corner, pouring 2 cups with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned that some conversations required caffeine and comfortable seating. She gestured toward folding chairs near the window that overlooked Pine Ridge's quiet Main Street.
Sarah, there's something you need to understand about transitioning from military to civilian life. The skills you developed during your service don't disappear just because you change zip codes and occupations. They remain available if you need them, but they don't have to define who you choose to become. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. But what if you're needed? What if there are situations that require exactly the capabilities you've developed, and walking away means other people get hurt? Kate looked toward the mountains that surrounded Pine Ridge, peaks that had sheltered her for 8 years while she learned to balance the competing demands of personal peace and professional responsibility. Then you find ways to help that don't require sacrificing the life you've built for yourself. You develop capabilities that allow you to respond when needed, while maintaining the identity you've chosen. She handed Sarah a business card, plain white cardstock with only a phone number printed in simple black text. If you decide you want to explore alternatives to traditional civilian employment, call this number. Tell them Kate sent you. They'll help you understand that there are ways to serve that don't require wearing uniforms or following conventional military protocols. As Sarah prepared to leave, she turned back one final time. The person who gave me your name said you'd understand because you'd made similar choices. Were they right? Kate's smile was enigmatic as she returned to Deputy Bradley's engine, her hands moving across mechanical components with the same precision she once applied to defusing explosive devices. Sometimes the most important service happens in places where no one notices and no one keeps score. Sometimes protecting people means being someone they never know they need to thank. After Sarah left, Kate completed the repair work on the patrol cruiser, ensuring that Deputy Bradley would have reliable transportation for maintaining law and order in a town where the biggest excitement usually came from the annual Harvest Festival. It was honest work that served a peaceful community, performed by someone who could respond to more complex threats if circumstances required such intervention. The secure satellite phone remained silent in its locked drawer, but Kate knew that silence was temporary. There would always be people like Patricia Hawkins who turned knowledge into weapons against the innocent. There would always be situations that required unconventional solutions developed by people who understood both systematic problem-solving and creative adaptation. But there would also always be small towns, like Pine Ridge, where mechanics could fix engines and charge fair prices, where people could choose their own identities and live according to their own principles. Kate Morrison had found the balance between these competing demands, maintaining capabilities for service while choosing the peaceful application of skills that could serve destructive purposes. As evening settled over the Colorado mountains, Kate descended to her hidden workshop for the daily equipment maintenance that kept her ready for missions that might never come. The woman who'd exposed international terrorist networks and prevented domestic attacks was also someone who could rebuild transmissions and replace brake pads with equal expertise. Some legend, Kate had learned, lived not in official records or public recognition, but in the quiet competence of people who chose to be helpful rather than famous. And, in a small mountain town where time moved differently, a mechanic who fixed broken things continued to write her story on her own terms, one repaired engine and one prevented catastrophe at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.